In each generation of Pokemon, there have always been 3 iconic starters, with a few games even going the extra mile of adding in an alternative starter. Over 25 years and 8 generations later, this is still in effect. From the classic Gen 1 trio of Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and Charmander, to the Gen 9 trio of Quaxly, Sprigatito, and Fuecoco, even to the oddballs of the trend like Pikachu and Eevee, many can remember their first starter. That said, what if these games had different starters? Which Pokemon could have wound up with the same praise as their buddies, and which would have had to remain in the wild? I'm Kyle with PokeBinge, and these are alternative Pokemon that could be starters. First off, we need to discuss the criteria. In order for any Pokemon to count as a starter Pokemon, they need to be fire, water, or grass type, or have a special reason to be obtained. For the fire, water, grass trio, they must also be 3 stages and evolve at fairly early levels, around 15 and 30 for each evolution. And each form needs to be around 315, 395, and 530 respectively. A contender on this list might need to meet these qualifications, but would require a few adjustments to work properly. We'll also be ranking these alternative starters on how well we think they would fit their new role as a starter Pokemon, and any adjustments that would have to be made because of it. With our criteria out of the way, let's begin. First up, these Pokemon are Pokemon that would either need major modifications in order to fit in, or they have some kind of issue holding them back from being full contenders for alternative starters. These Pokemon don't really fit. The worst viable candidate to be a starter has to be the Magby line. While it could be possible for them to be made into starters, there are just too many issues to be viable outside of a ROM hack. For one, Magby is too strong. A surprising fact considering it's a baby Pokemon, with a whopping 365 BST, and with it gaining moves every 4 levels. It would perform better than other starters by a high margin. It also doesn't evolve until level 30, meaning for about 15 levels, it becomes weaker than a starter would. When it does, however, it would be weaker than a final form starter, coming out with only a 495 BST, while it can evolve again to become slightly stronger than most starters, with a solid 540 BST. It's a trait evolution with an item. All of this isn't what keeps the Magby line from placing higher though. It's the way it's set up. For one, it wouldn't even work until the Gen 4 games or beyond, because it was a single stage in Gen 1, and a baby and evolution in Gen 2. This is the only Pokemon on the list that has 3 forms introduced in 3 different generations, and that's a huge detriment to its actual viability as a starter. Therefore, while we acknowledge it could work as a starter with the proper adjustments, we don't think it would be worth it, even if it would make for an excellent starter. The only other member of this category is the Litwick line, and the only other fire type on the list. Litwick and its line would have placed higher up if it wasn't for their slew of issues. Being ghost Pokemon, they would completely dominate the early game, being immune to both normal and fighting moves, as well as fire moves if they have the flash fire ability. Additionally, Litwick does not evolve until level 41, over 5 to 10 levels after some starters are fully evolved. Until then, you would have a Pokemon that is weaker than a first form starter, with only a 275 base stat total. Even after it evolves, it gains only 95 BST more, becoming somewhat stronger than a second form starter, but weaker than it should be at its level. To make matters worse, until you can get a hold of a Duskstone, it cannot evolve further, and those tend to be somewhat elusive to find. Chandelure, however, redeems the line a bit, becoming a solid 520 base stat Pokemon, a little weaker than a starter. It has a higher special attack than most Pokemon, tying with Cursola and Vikavolt for the highest special attack of a non-legendary, non-mythical Pokemon. That said, like most stone evolutions, it no longer learns moves by leveling up. Still, if adjusted properly, the Litwick line could make for great starters, but there would need to be some serious changes made to both the line and the games for it to be a viable starter. Our next category includes the Pokemon that could function as starters, but would have some noticeable issues. These Pokemon are the Flawed. The first line in this category is the Oddish line. While we actually think they would rank quite well, its main issue comes from its split evolution. Oddish itself has a similar stat total to a starter, coming in at a clean 320. When it evolves into Gloom is when things get a bit shaky. evolving at a little higher level than starters. At level 21, it still comes out on the lower end, with only a 395 BST, though a couple points could easily be added onto it. It also has access to much of the same moves grass starters do, with Status Affliction and Sleep and Poison Powder, as well as Stun Spore, and access to the incredible status move Toxic. It gains access to Leech Seed, and while not every starter gets it, it could always be changed to a level up move. The main issues, outside of its split evolution, comes from its final forms. While our writer personally enjoys Bulbasaur more, we think the better fit would be its Gen 1 line, where only Vileplume was present. With a decent 480 BST, it would need at least 50 points put into its stats to be viable, and that's before you consider it evolves from a Leaf Stone. Additionally, while it does learn Moonblast by leveling up, outside of the few amazing moves it has access to, that's about the best it has. Examples include moves like Pollen Puff and Sunny Day via TM and TR, and Natural Power, Leech Seed, and the elusive Strength Sap through breeding. Most of its other egg moves are situational or flat out terrible. Much of its coverage remains in Stab, a few fairy moves, and normal moves, or their physical moves. And while Vileplume has access to Swords Dance, even a negative special attack nature Vileplume will generally have better overall performance than a physical attacking one before considering boosts. Still, we think with the right adjustments, the Oddish line could make solid picks for starters that could possibly compete with the Bulbasaur line in viability. The next Pokemon we should talk about is the Poliwag line. This line exhibits some of the same issues with the Oddish line, but not to the same extent. However, unlike Oddish, Poliwag is weaker than a standard starter, with only 300 to its base stat. Luckily, this doesn't prove to be on the lower end of a starter, at 385 when it evolves. But then another major issue arises: split evolution. For this sake, both for ease and since it was the original line, we'll be taking Poliwrath as the final form. In this case, it takes a Water Stone to evolve it, and like most stone evolutions, loses out to level up moves after becoming its final form. It's also too weak, coming in at only 500 before Gen 6, and afterwards 510. What places this line of tadpoles above the Oddish line comes down to overall usability. Already, from moves alone, there is more variety in move typing, gaining access to standard normal and stab moves, but also ground from leveling up. Add in fighting, ice, dark, rock, and poison to the list of typings with viable moves for Poliwrath, and it already outpaces Vileplume. Like the Chandelure line, it can nab an immunity to its own typing with Water Absorb, healing 1/4 its max HP, and making it a viable switch-in option. The last line of this category is the Bellsprout line. This line of carnivorous plants shares the same typing and final evolution method with the Oddish line, starting out about 15 to 20 points weaker than a starter. Bellsprout makes up for it with immediate stab options in Vine Whip, and many of the same benefits of the Oddish line, learning the 3 powders, and only learning one special move until its final form, Acid, already makes it bounds over its typical version exclusive counterpart. While its evolution needs to be adjusted a few levels down, Weepinbell has a high enough base stat total to contend as a second form of a starter, and Victory Bell even learns 2 moves by leveling up after evolving. Unlike many stone-based evolutions, if a starter in Gen 1, it would have been incredibly powerful, unlike the move Razor Leaf, a move that had a near guaranteed critical chance when used. And unlike Vileplume, while it is a more physically focused Pokemon, it has a usable special and physical attack in games where the split occurs. This allows it to go more on the special side with moves like Giga Drain, Sludge Bomb, and Leaf Storm. On the standard physical side, it can attack with moves such as Leaf Blade, Leaf Light in Gen 7 games and beyond, and Knockoff. As a result, in both past and present games, it could easily make for a viable starter, but with a stone-based final form with only 480 BST, it would need some clear adjustments. Still, if these changes were made, we think it could make a decent grass-type starter. Our next category consists of Pokemon that have some minor issues that need to be addressed, or ones with a couple major issues that would still make great starters. These are the solid picks. Our first pick in this category goes to the Squirtle line. While their typing is something left to be desired, their line is overall pretty good otherwise. Most of its issues come down to it being a poor dual typing, its evolution methods, and its stats. However, Leavanny makes up for this, coming in with a generously strong move pool and surprisingly viable stats already. It learned some fairly decent moves early on as a Squirtle, in both Bug Bite and Razor Leaf, and as Leavanny, this only expands. While its primary learn set only consists of stab moves, status, and normal moves, Leavanny has access to useful moves such as Helping Hand, False Swipe, and Entrainment, as well as more type variety from TMs from other starter Pokemon in their final forms. The line's drawback points are mainly its aforementioned awful typing, a need for a stat rebalance, and evolution. Leavanny, also being the only one to get great moves, lowers it a bit. Still, Sewaddle, while it would be on the lower side, has enough stats to count, and Swadloon and Leavanny only need a small buff to their stats. The level for first evolution, while just above, could easily be dropped down a couple levels, from 20 to 16 or 18. For the second evolution, it could simply be swapped to double the first evolution's level. That said, to compensate for this, in the Gen 5 games, Berg, who uses a Leavanny, would need to switch his ace. While the easy solution to this would be to give him a Swadloon, gym leaders don't usually use starter Pokemon, so we do have to dock off a few points here as well. Moving on to another pick is the Horsey line. While the evolution methods and stats need adjustment, Kingdra would make for a solid starter, containing what was considered the best type in Gen 2, being only weak to Dragon. That trend continued until Gen 6, where it gained a fairy weakness. Like an actual water starter that it could be compared to, Poplio, it also learns moves of its final typing, this case being Twister, Dragon Breath, and Dragon Pulse. As a Kingdra, it also gains access to moves of a great variety, and both of its natural abilities have usability, with Swift Swim taking the win over Sniper, if you're taking competitive play into account. What lands it in this category and not the previous is the fact it works out rather well. All that would need to be done would be to adjust the base stat levels to Horsey and Seadra, and to change evolution. For the first evolution, this could be changed to level 16, and the base stats could be made around 320 to compensate. For the second evolution, change it to either 32, like the regular level for Horsey to evolve, or change it up to 36. Seadra would also need a 50-point stat reduction. Regardless, either would work, as Kingdra, having a 540 stat total, would be on the stronger end of the starters. Otherwise, Kingdra can remain unchanged. In addition, Kingdra's TM and TR list are quite decent, and it has fairly good stats across the board. Plus, if we can have a fairy or ghost starter, it's about time we have a dragon one too. The last line in this group is the Pansage line. It's commonly theorized that Pansage was one of the original Unova starters. This is further backed up by the fact that Pansage is the only non-starter to get the ability Overgrow, though it is reserved as a hidden ability. This theory is further emphasized by the fact it also has a 316 BST, very similar to what a starter would have, and a decent move type variety. Many of its egg moves are beneficial and would easily find usage after evolution too, and its TM list contains both special and physical moves that are useful, as well as moves to set up. This allows it to use either attack stat and perform fairly okay. The main issue with this Pokemon is that it evolves with a Leaf Stone, and would need a third form, splitting its stats. In weakening the second form and boosting into a third, the evolution method could be changed to a starter Pokemon's. This would also allow it to obtain more usable moves for whichever kind of attacker it would end up becoming. In this case, however, it was kept as is. It could also fit well because of two-stage starters like Pikachu and Eevee. If it was to fit in with that style, it would need to be one of the Let's Go style games, with the Pokemon instead unable to evolve. Nonetheless, if either option was pursued, Pansage's line could work well as a grass starter. This last section is for Pokemon that we think would work best as alternative starters. These Pokemon should be starters. Speaking of Let's Go, the first line here is the Psyduck line. Originally the second starter in the Let's Go games, it was later swapped out for Eevee to prevent confusion between the two versions. This information was confirmed by Masuda himself, who is a fan of Psyduck, and was saddened by the realization Psyduck had to be canned for marketing. Still, this doesn't prevent Psyduck from working as a starter. In fact, it should be one. Specifically, it should be in the case of the next Let's Go games, if they make more. Psyduck already has stats befitting of a starter Pokemon, sitting at a solid 320. Its evolution, Golduck, also has a BST stronger than Raichu and weaker than any of the evolutions. So a Let's Go starter version absolutely could be buffed to include it. Both sides of its attacking moves are also quite decent, though its physical moveset is noticeably larger. Its role in the anime as one of Misty's Pokemon, acting somewhat of an iconic Pokemon, heightens this viability, as it was was commonly shown around Pikachu since the very beginning. Therefore, if we ever had the chance for Psyduck to be a special 2-stage starter, be it in a Let's Go game or otherwise, we'd love for the classic yellow duck with psychic powers to get its chance to shine. Now, before we go over our final Pokemon, we want to throw out some honorable mentions to Pokemon that didn't quite make the cut. The first honorable mention goes to the Clefairy line. While it was the original mascot of Pokemon before Pikachu, it would essentially be on the list for the same reasons as Pansage or Psyduck. It held some sort of important position that was later scrapped, and thus could work well in a game as an alternate starter. Our next honorable mention goes to the Boonsweet line. They may be sweet, but their issues surely are not. Between only being female, one of the forms being weaker than a Pidgey, and requiring a level up move to evolve, it has its problems. And that's before you consider that each member needs a stat adjustment, and change in method or change in evolution level. The last honorable mention goes to the Lotad line. While Seedot has a few more issues than Lotad, Lotad still doesn't quite meet the criteria. However, this time, it is mainly because of its secondary type, water. Being able to cancel out its fire weakness and hit it super effectively has never been a thing with starters. And with the upcoming Scarlet and Violet games, the starters don't appear as if they'll be changing this. If it had no secondary type, or a different one, it would have been on our list. And finally, we get to our top pick. Our choice for the best alternative starter goes to the Tympole line. Yeah, it surprised us as well. Turns out that all it needs to be effective is about a plus 20 BST boost to the line overall, applied to all 3 members, as well as a change to Tympole's evolution level. While it would be on the weaker end of the starter BST for the final form, the line makes up for it in many other ways. For one, Palpitoad evolves at level 36, so you could drop Tympole's evolution to level 18 from level 25. Additionally, the stat spread is fairly similar to a good number of other starters, and could work either specially or physically. This is aided by having a pair of great abilities, regardless of which is used. Being able to gain an immunity to water moves, get a speed boost in the rain, or add a chance to poison with contact moves. While its level up moveset is only decent, where it shines is the TM and TR list the line holds. Seismitoad itself learns Drain Punch at level 1, and from evolution, as well as other useful moves. Examples on the physical side include Earthquake, Power Whip, and Poison Jab, while special moves would include Sludge Bomb, Ice Beam, and Grass Knot. Making it even better is the ability to get the incredibly strong Toxic by Egg move, especially when only a handful of Pokemon get it now. Give the form something like plus 10 base speed and plus 5 to each of its base offensive stats, and we could see this thing being an even stronger Pokemon than it already is. It's also one of the only few alternative starter Pokemon on this list, both actual and honorable mentions, that still sees consistent competitive use to this day. And that's our take on alternative Pokemon starters. But let us know what your ideas are in the comment section below. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our Pokemon videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.